This is an event we're running in collaboration with General Assembly around how we can conquer our own Everest. And today we're very fortunate to be joined with George Bullard, who's an incredible explorer, adventurer. He's done a total of 14 expeditions around the world from, at the time, I believe it was the longest unsupported polar expedition, traveling over 2,000 miles on foot, to kayaking from Greenland to Scotland. So, George, I think there's no doubt that you've done some pretty remarkable and incredible things. So thank you very much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, James. I hasten to add that all of those numerous expeditions, it takes a very small brain. So we're going to hear today.
Not at all. So I think today the title of this talk is around what we can do to conquer our own Everest. Now, I think in your case, you've done some pretty remarkable things, and I think, well, at least for myself, and I'm sure most of the attendees, our Everest won't be so much the longest unsupported polar expedition, but maybe something smaller. But I really want to frame this conversation today around, I think, the 4 zones that we travel through on our way to conquering a goal. Where that starts at sitting in our comfort zone, as we are, I'm sure, all here today, our bottles of water, sitting in our nice, comfortable apartments, and traveling through then into the fear zone, when we may have fear holding us back, then onto the learning zone when we're able to acquire these new skills, and then finally to the growth zone where we're able to conquer our objectives. So I think, George, just to kick off, you've done these incredible expeditions, you've got some amazing stories. So why is it that you seek out to do these crazy things?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Great question. I think just on that framework which you mentioned, especially around in a comfort zone, for me, it's been taking opportunities, which has been a real key for me. I think saying yes to things, even though the risk profile, even though the chance of failure has been there. I think I've always said yes to things, and then probably delved into the practicalities of whether it's indeed possible. and that might be a bad thing, but I think that having a really positive, really really at our best is one where it's really led me out of that comfort zone. It's taken me to places not just physically but also metaphorically and mentally. Saying yes has taken me to places that are well outside of my comfort zone, and have indeed that then sparked me down that channel which you mentioned at the beginning, that channel from being comfortable and happy with everything that you've got and everything and aware of everything that you have, all the way down to that channel into that fear zone, which we will come on to in a second. But really, my main reason for why I do these things is not only that it's about saying yes and getting involved and testing myself and seeing where the limits are. I was very fortunate as a young kid to realize that we are all here for a finite amount of time. And I give you this little illustration. In fact, every day we're given a bank of time. Okay, so picture this with me. You every day go to the time bank and you take out 24 hours, 24 units, okay? 24 units. Those are your hours in the day that you have. And you could do whatever you want with those 24 units. But crucially, this time bank offers no refunds. It offers, there's no money back guarantees. There's absolutely nothing. And at the end of the day, at the end of that time period, whatever you have left over is gone, is wiped. So you have that money in your hands at the beginning of every day. And it's totally up to you how you use it, how you spend it. And I think my main driver for me has really been that concept of the time bank. It's been that idea that we have such a small amount of time on this planet. And I made a real conscious choice as a kid when I was very young, 14, I swam across the English Channel. 15, we swam around Barbados. 16, we swam around New York. 17, we swam along Lake Zurich. And then Antarctica, the Arctic. for me, it's been like, I didn't never set out to become an adventurer. I never set out to become an explorer. I still don't think I am. But I certainly have that concept of time. And throughout my school summer holidays as a young kid, I was like fortunate enough to be armed with that really positive toolbox, which allowed me to say yes and take opportunities wherever I saw them, especially if those opportunities got me away from the sofa and away from the TV. I was super even keener to take those opportunities. So that's really kind of how I got into it. I think, James, that there'll be some chance of questions at the end, won't there?
Yeah, there will. So I think we'll do half an hour of me quizzing you, and then we'll open it up to the floor for a 15-minute Q&A as well, which is good.
Yeah, awesome.
So, George, I think you're so right. I think the key to kind of consistent growth is becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, and yourself having that mindset, that yes mindset to doing these incredible things. I would say it's pretty unique. I think for a lot of us, and myself included, when we've got these massive goals, that first yes can be very difficult. Whether it's overcoming a fear, creating some excuses as to why we can't do this, or just a lack of confidence. So what is it really for you, perhaps even more so at the beginning when that first expedition you did, that first swim when you were 14, through to now, what is it that gets you out of your comfort zone, and what can we do to take that first step?
Yeah, totally. Great question, James. Yeah. So I live by the saying that that fear makes you live, but panic kills. That's absolutely crucial. So if you're going to step out of your comfort zone and enter into this fear zone, which we've described as being the sort of the next stage on conquering your own Everest, within the fear zone, there is going to be moments where you are fearful, you're scared, right? And that just makes all of your antennas, all of your senses switch on. Everything's absorbing things, everything's alert. But there's a very fine balance between being fearful and panicking. And it's this side of the spectrum which kills you. It's this side where things are under control, you're scared, you're fearful, but all of your senses are switched on. It's this side of the spectrum, in the panic side, where you start to make irrational decisions. You start to make decisions quickly, under stress. You are out of control, totally out of control, and that's really where we don't want to be when it comes to stepping out of your comfort zone. You do not want to be in the panic zone. So preparing yourself for these expeditions is absolutely crucial. Physically, mentally, emotionally, it is fundamental to what we do. But beyond that, the whole idea of fear. So once you kind of stepped into your fear zone, you're happy you're going to step into it in the fear bit, not in the panic bit. Stay in the fear bit. That's crucial. But there's also why would you not step out of your comfort zone? Why would you? What's in it for you? What's the purpose? And why might do some of us not step out of our comfort zone? And I think that there are really two things, which we'll come on to the second one in a second. I think in the next sort of bucket. But in this fear bucket, I think there is a real fear of failure. There's a real fear of what your colleagues, what your family, what your friends will think if you come back and you say, look, I tried my best, I did everything I could, but it just didn't work out, or I wasn't strong enough, or whatever the reason for failure is. There's a real fear of failure, and that's probably I think the biggest reason why people choose not to step out of their comfort zone is that fear of failure. And I failed heaps and heaps. I failed. In fact, when we tried somewhere on the island of Barbados, there was a team of 5 of us. We were 16 years old, best mates from school. We put hours and hours and hours of training in at the pool, totally voluntarily. And, we were inspired by our coach, who was a super great guy. And he swam every yard with us and inspired us to do all these swims or do all these challenges every summer. And so we were 5:45 in the morning, swimming before school started, swimming after school as well. I basically stank of chlorine. It was really because of him that we set out on these journeys, we set out away from our comfort zone,
Mm.
and pretty soon realised we were able to swim around Barbados, swimming amongst the Portuguese men of war, the sharks, that actually it wasn't going to be possible, but not because of the Portuguese men of war and the sharks, merely because of the weather. So we had a huge storm coming in off the Atlantic that we didn't foresee in our forecasts. It whipped up super quickly, and the waves were as high as my house. I distinctly remember being able to see the seabed, and then the next minute I'm on top of a wave and the seabed's totally disappeared. I was like, Jesus, this is actually quite scary. And that's the good zone. The scare zone is a good part to be in. When we started then to lose control of outboards on motors, they started falling off boats and things. It was kind of rough. That's when we decided to call it a day, and so we failed. But the following day, crucially, the following day, we got back into the water on the calmer side of the island, and swam that distance down. I think it was 30k. I can't remember. It's 2006, quite a long time ago. I just got a small brain. And so we turned absolute failure into arguable success. We swam a significant distance around the island because we did it. Long story, but not one for now. But we actually swam a significant distance more, having done that altogether. So arguable success, but real heartfelt failure from all of us. And we all say it, we all coin it so much, but Winston Churchill said it. He said it so well. He said that success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. And I think that's also key. It's a lovely point to make. Is that actually enthusiasm and positivity is such a great tool to have in your toolbox when all of your chips are down, you're staring down the barrel of failure, and actually just a cheerful remark and a positive outlook can really turn the balance with you and your team at work. So if you take that, even if that's what you're going to take from today, success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. I think that's just a phenomenal thing which I've worked through in that fear zone, which we're focusing on now when it comes to failing.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I do want to touch again on failure when we kind of enter the learning zone. But I mean, still in the fear zone, you've done these expeditions, and I mean, swim around Barbados with that storm. I think for most of us, we would be out of the water the second the wave got above about 3 feet. But has there been a time for you when this fear has become too much, and really you've been looking at an expedition, you're in a moment, and actually you mentioned those two hemispheres, the fear zone and then the panic zone, where actually you were quite worried about entering that panic zone?
I guess with those zones, the fear and the panic zone, I'm still here. So panic clearly doesn't kill. Of course, I've been very close to that zone, to that border, between fear and panic. I think that there has been quite a few situations. Some of them aren't so nice and would actually open up a whole can of worms, and we haven't got time to speak about it today. But I hope there will be more times to speak about those experiences. But there are a few times, where we did a kayaking journey across the North Atlantic Ocean, and it was incredibly stupid, really, looking back on it. We set out in a 26-foot long kayak, which we pretty much, it's off the shelf. Pull it off the shelf. There's your kayak. We did a few modifications to enable us to sleep down inside the boat. Sleeping, you had to sleep on your back in this coffin position. You couldn't roll onto your side. It was pretty miserable. But really, that risk profile was so narrow. As you set out, touched land for the last time, and paddled straight towards the horizon between Greenland and Scotland, was a pretty committing moment. And I think I'd probably been on the border between fear and panic for most of that journey. But what I did to manage that border between fear and panic, which is very close, very narrow, as we described, was really pull everything back into the second I'm sitting there in. So picture this with me. We were kayaking, and there was orcas on my left, big killer whales on my left. There was a breaking waves on a granite cliff face on my right, and we were in a 26-foot long kayak. So you might suspect we were pretty exposed, and of course we were totally exposed. But what I did in that exact moment was really pull everything back and say, look, right, they're there. That's where they are. And actually, they're causing no problem at all. So actually, let's forget them. Let's put them out. They're nothing to do with this problem right now. I'm fearful for many things, but they're actually not causing a problem right now. What I'm fearful of is actually pretty hard to put a finger on, because it could be many different things, those guys included. So pull everything back into the moment. I've got food, I'm watered, and I'm warm. And actually, that is the real essence to balancing that line between fear and panic, like without falling into the panic. So pulling everything back into a moment where you can control, pulling everything back into the split second where you can just assess your vital signs, if you like, as they call them, your food, water, and warmth. And actually, then everything else is fine. Everything else, it can wait. Those decisions can wait. So there's no need to panic, because that will lead you to making bad decisions. Let's stay in the fear zone. Let's say, okay, I'm fearful of them. I'm fearful of those orcas, but I've got food, water, and warmth, and I'm going to be okay. That's kind of how to navigate that borderline well, if you like. And of course, there's a little bit of preparation in there. So preparing yourself mentally for what you're about to go through. I think on that particular expedition, I hadn't really considered how vulnerable we were. We were hundreds and hundreds of miles offshore, and in a boat which I couldn't stand up in. You can't walk around. You're sleeping in a coffin, basically. And I hadn't really considered how vulnerable I was going to be, and that, I think, was a weakness really of mine on that particular trip. I really hadn't understood just how exposed we were going to be. The top half of my body was out, exposed to the elements, and I could see all around me, and there was no, if the kayak sank like that, I would be dead. There was nothing. We saw one or two boats near Scotland when we got near, but otherwise that's kind of it really. And I hadn't prepared myself well enough for that exposure. So as soon as that exposure, that feeling of exposure happened, you touch land and you paddled and you look behind you and suddenly the land had disappeared, I felt super vulnerable. But of course, pulling it back into the moment, I'm fed, I'm watered and warm. I'm okay, right. I need to get to land. I need to get there. There's no going back. Let's stay committed. Let's stay determined and keep going.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I mean, how we manage fear, I think, and George, I'm not sure whether you'd agree, but would you say that's unique to you and that everyone has their own way of managing that fear? Because I think for most of us, I mean, when you're kayaking from Greenland to Scotland, your problems or your fears are just so much greater than perhaps, a little bit of fear for me before I jump on a webinar with 100 people or so. For me, sitting down, it's not necessarily do I have food, water, and warmth. So, I mean, managing that fear, how did you understand, I guess, your own way of overcoming that fear? Was that just through a process of trial and error?
That's great. I understand. I'm going to bring you back to the title of this webinar is climbing your Everest, right? So everyone's going to manage fear, manage it all very differently. So I can't possibly begin to speak for anyone else apart from myself. But what I can encourage people to do is to climb your own Everest, not just your Everest, but your own Everest. And your fear, your panic, your fear profile, your risk profile, what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to do to step out of your comfort zone will be widely different between every single person on this webinar. For example, someone here might be an amazing singer, and very recently, as Baz Luhrmann said, he said, do one thing every day that scares you. And I was, in London and before lockdown, and I was walking around. I thought, God, I haven't done anything that scared me for a while, for a bit. So I was walking past a busker guy playing the guitar, and I was like, I'm a terrible singer. So I said to him, can I sing? Is that all right? I'm quite scared, but I want to have a go. Can you play like a Wonderwall, Oasis or something, and I would just belt it out and see if I could do anything. And needless to say, in Covent Garden, I cleared Covent Garden. But, it was like would be something I'm very scared of, whereas someone on this call might not be so scared of it because they're a professional singer. And if Jerry Halliwell's on the line, just let me know.
Oh, well, that's great. And I mean, George, listening to this as well, I think some people, including myself, I'm quite interested to know, are you, I don't know how to phrase this, but are you a bit of a psychopath in a way? Because, seeking out these opportunities to really challenge yourself. For you, is that something you think is more like human nature and just like the way that you're made up? Or is that something you've learned over time actually leads to kind of consistent growth, putting yourself in that fear zone?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't actively ever, I suspect if I went to go, I mean, I have been to see therapists, and I think for various expeditions and various reasons. And I think I've never been described as a psychopath, for sure. Is my personality addictive? No, not really. But could you describe my love of the outdoors, my love of adventure, my love of seeking new things as a flaw? I mean, you probably could say I have a condition, but I would simply turn around and say, like, it's an absolute passion of mine. I passionately believe that the outdoors, spending more time outdoors, can change every single person on this webinar today. Whether that is mentally, physically, emotionally, it can change you all by spending more time outdoors. And I'll give you an example of this. There was some scientists did a study, an epidemiological study of people recovering from operations. And they did a very simple study where they put half the group, half the patients in a ward which looked out onto bricks, right? Buildings, bricks, like a cityscape. And the other half were put in a ward which looks out over green spaces, over the outdoors. Every single person in the ward which looked out over a green space recovered quicker than the people who looked out over walls and bricks and a cityscape. So there's got to be something in it, and it's very hard to prove. So I'm back to what you asked me, was more about, am I a psychopath about the outdoors? I love it, and if I can get one person to spend a tiny bit more time outdoors, I truly believe it could change their lives. And of course, I think one thing which drives me in life is really getting, maybe a fear of regret, possibly. You probably say I probably have a fear of getting to the end of my life and lying on my deathbed and thinking, bugger, I wish I did that. Or I wish I used my 20s better, or I wish I spent more time. I don't know. I just don't want to get to the end of my time and regret something. I kind of want to, as that famous saying goes, I want to skid into my grave broadside, come skidding in broadside, because I can't think of any other way I'd like to finish my time on planet Earth than skidding into my grave broadside.
Well, I think that's an amazing mindset to have. And George, I just want to bring it back to the risk taking, because I would definitely agree that risk taking is I think a very important step in reaching the learning zone, and obviously with risk comes a risk of failure. You mentioned the Barbados trip, where obviously the weather got so bad that you had to pull out of that. But I'm just interested afterwards. I think, personally, I think if I fail at something, it can make it hard for me to try again. And as you mentioned, everyone has that fear of failure. But how did you overcome that after your expedition to then go on and obviously now have done multiple dozens of new expeditions?
Yeah. So overcoming failure is something which I speak a lot about, in fact. And there's also like a sort of step-by-step process for this, and it's quite similar to grieving in many ways. But for the way that I do it and bounce back from it so quickly, I guess that it becomes a question of adaptability and elasticity and sort of bounce back ability. And I think we've obviously all experienced that through lockdown. In fact, I kind of once I failed, I look back on it, I address it, and I say, you know, why did I fail? Was it my fault? Could I have done that better? And actually, once I've kind of gone through that process, I kind of then almost turn my back on it, carry on and try again, and try again. Because actually, you know, grieving for a long time about failing isn't productive, but it is productive looking back on it and facing square into the failure that you've just experienced. And I think what's also helped me is that the success stories are interesting and people want to know about these success stories. But actually, so much comes from failing. So much more comes from failing. And I'm not saying I would ever set out trying to fail, trying to make a story of failing, but so much comes from the difficult times. You learn. I think this now kind of brings us nicely into our learning zone. We've come through the fear zone. We might have succeeded, but we might also fail at something. And I tend to learn so much more about myself, about, I guess, the world, when I fail, when it doesn't go to plan. And it's crucial, once you have failed, to turn and look at that, to learn why you have failed, to try and take something from it, and then to turn away from it and sort of power on, if you like, because that's also really important. I'll give you a little bit of an illustration actually on this, and I think it does tie risk nicely. Risk is tied nicely into this as well. I love climbing trees, right? I think my childhood curiosity is something I've clung on to. And climbing trees is a great little metaphor for risk. And I can visualize myself climbing an old fir tree. And I remember like reaching up and grabbing hold of this branch and transferring a bit of weight onto it, and it snapped, right? So I'm fearful. I'm climbing a tree. I'm kind of going off the ground. Grab a branch, it snaps. I've mini failure. I've failed. But what I have done immediately then is I kind of look at that branch. I'm like, okay, that risk, the risk of grabbing onto that branch because it was this big or whatever, this thick, was beyond my risk profile. And as T.S. Eliot said, he said that only those who risk going too far, i.e. grabbing onto, too small a branch, maybe twig, only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how much they can risk. And I think knowing what you can risk educates you. You learn so much about yourself from risk, from maybe going a step too far, grabbing onto too small a twig. You know exactly what your boundaries are, and then you're able to navigate your way up your own Everest much more effectively. And I think that's quite a nice metaphor for blending in risk and failure, and also climbing your own Everest, climbing a tree, into our sort of framework of today, of traveling from your comfort zone into your fear zone, into your learning zone, and finally into your growth zone, where you've come back, you've learned something, you feel satisfied and fulfilled, and actually, crucially, happy with yourself.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. So, George, I'm going to ask you one more question to keep it scheduled, and then allow 15 minutes for Q&A. So, while I'm asking this question, anyone who's got any questions, just put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And that question is now just bringing us on from that learning zone into the growth zone. And, that obviously all of these zones are inextricably linked. And I just want to know, since your first expedition to now, in what ways do you feel you've grown since then?
That's a great question. As in since doing adventures, James? Since getting involved?
Since getting involved, back at 14 years old, due to these expeditions that you've gone on.
Gosh, I mean, that's a hell of a question. I speak for hours about this sort of stuff. But I think what the main way that adventure has changed me, principally, has just given me a really profound sense of gratefulness. As I'm sure everyone knows, you only know how lucky or how much you enjoy something when you don't have it, right? Or how much you need something when you don't have it. And a lot of this happens in the outdoors, in nature. you don't have electricity. You don't have your hairdryer or a nice clean shower or a clean shirt to put on in the morning, maybe. And I think it's given me adventures really has made me incredibly grateful for everything that we have around us. And I think it's much more simple than like a warm shower. It's more like back to sort of the vital signs. It's more like I'm so grateful for the food I've got on my plate. And I don't say that, I'm not saying that in a flippant way. It really does. I have a really deep appreciation for life. It makes me a bit teary even saying it. Like, I'm so thankful to my parents, to my friends, and to everybody. God, George, you're so grateful to everybody for how fortunate we are and how lucky I am to wear a t-shirt and be warm. And I think that's really the main thing that's changed for me. I think in order to keep it regularly in time, I think that's probably the principal thing. It's obviously totally changed my perspectives. It's totally changed the way that I go about my daily life. But as I said, it's not at all easy. When someone says to you, "What do you do for a living?" and I say, "I'm an explorer, I'm an adventurer," all that goes through my head is just how niche a job title that is. And then the next question is, how do you make money? I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. But, that appreciation has made me incredibly happy with the skin that I'm in, and I think that's a very fortunate position to be in. To be fair, there's a lot of people out there who look at themselves in the mirror and maybe aren't so happy with what they see, and So if I can persuade any of you guys, whether that's through following my Instagram or through websites or webinars like this, just to spend a bit more time outdoors, challenging yourself, stepping out of your comfort zone, your own personal comfort zone, climbing your own Everests, then that's I think it would make if it has the same effect that it's had on me, then I can't implore you to do it enough.
Yeah, and I think gratitude's such a major one. If you look at the biggest indicator of happiness is actually gratitude. So I think that's not a bad learning to take away from all your years of exploring and expeditions. So great. Well, George, so we've got a lot of questions that have piled in. So I think the first one I'm just going to ask from Yasmin, which I think is a great question. And she's asked, I find that times of doing nothing goal-oriented and pauses from taking action are the times when creativity and ideas happen. How does that go with saying yes and doing and accomplishing a lot?
Can you just say that one again, James? So what Jasmine was saying was the times of peace are the times when you're most creative. Therefore, why are you constantly saying yes? You find yourself with no peace. Is that what she says basically? Yeah,
or rather the times when you pause are times when you're able to reflect and times when creativity and ideas happen. Oh, sorry, George. Can you hear me? Okay, cut out for a second. Oh, George, I'm gonna stop your video.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. George, yeah. So sorry. So Yasmin's question was when she's doing nothing goal oriented and taking those pauses. Is when a lot of creativity and ideas happen. How does that go hand in hand with saying yes and doing and accomplishing a lot?
Yeah, great question, Yasmin. I totally see it. You're absolutely right. I think spending time thinking at peace with yourself, I think, is an art in itself. I think being able to do that and be happy in the skin that you are in and allowing yourself to be creative in that way is a skill, and I think it really does come from being happy in your own self. I absolutely agree. You do find I certainly find peace and creativity in the times, in the moment, in the stillness. And how do I actually find time to do that? I think I certainly, when things get quite stressful, I certainly do take myself into nature and just go and spend time and be. I think that was certainly a message of mine through lockdown, was trying, if you could find yourself that moment, that space to sit and do nothing, then actually that's a wonderful thing. I do active time too long in London. I live and work in London, but I try and get out at the weekends, go somewhere, do something, use my weekends as much as I can. And so really that would be kind of, if you want to know actually how do I find time for myself, that is how.